It's coming more from the business side, in the sense what my counterparts in the business are kind of, asking as a requirement, for lack of a better word, and saying that, look, this is how we would like to kind of, run our business, and what is it that you can do from a digital or from an IT perspective to solve our problems. So what's our story here? Like, so the major realization that I kind of, came across, it's not so much about the volume, but it's about the complexity of the manufacturing that kind of, hit me much more than, the so-called volume. So the volume game is pretty much, very straightforward. You kind of, lay the process out once, and you kind of set up your systems once, and it kind of goes on for 6 months, 6 weeks, years together. But once you start introducing that, it's more like a high mix, low volume kind of a thing, then you start looking at the whole problem very differently. Almost every day or every alternate day, you would have to start changing the process, and therefore we are not actually digitizing to go faster. Of course, that's definitely a requirement for the business. You definitely want to have systems which work much faster and you produce much faster. But the more important thing that I had to kind of, put in place was to ensure that, you actually stop the errors from this constant change that happened as a result of, switching from one production line into another. So point being that, volume is a very different game compared to the kind of requirements that we have had, which is more to do with, the complexity of the engineering and the manufacturing itself, not necessarily, something that runs for a long time, for 6 months, 6 weeks on the same product kind of a thing. And very quickly switching into the context of, what the connected factory means, because it is very different for different people from different backgrounds and all. For me, it was something along this line. So 3 years ago, the entire factory was more like a black box. Now I think it's more like a glass factory. So what I mean by that is, at least, something was going in, and, the output was coming out, let us say 3 years ago. I've got some visibility of at least what's happening in the factory, sitting away from the actual factory location itself. So how do you do the so-called manufacturing execution system? First level, let me make sure at least that what's happening on the floor is kind of, getting captured somewhere. So think of it more like a one-way digital twin. At least have got that visibility to tell you, how much is getting produced, what's getting produced, when planning is happening, around what time. I mean, you could even probably say that, what, why don't you just put a security camera, and you actually get a complete visibility of what's happening in the factory. That's one way to look at it. But how do you translate that and actually make out of, the data that is coming out of the factory, and say that, what, let's at least make it digitized. Then we'll start seeing about, what comes out of it as a result of that. So the second level was to kind of, go into the connected factory itself and set up basic MES to kind of, get this going. And yeah, and it's extremely important that, I mean, it's not as simple as saying that, you can't take legacy, manufacturing systems and say that how do you get data out of that one. So it's not that simple for, factory lines which are traditionally kind of, not talking to each other. So the way I kind of, looked at it when I stepped back a little was, it's not so much about the factories not being connected to the digital world. It was more to do with, oh, this equipment specifically gives out data in a log format. That equipment actually starts emitting it in a SQL database. Another equipment probably kind of, contains it and starts giving it in, some other kind of a format which I might not even be able to assimilate. So the problem that I understood very quickly was, it was more to do with bringing all these kinds of different formats in which the machines are emitting the data, and make sense out of it, and so that the MES system in itself kind of, starts capturing in whatever way. Otherwise, you have some machines which are probably not connected, and you definitely don't have visibility on that. And let's say that, okay, over a period of time, you've got 80% of the factory. So, I mean, if people who come from our industry specifically, Ashwini, I'm looking at you, you probably kind of, have similar industry there. So the SMP line in itself probably has got that intelligence, because they are really advanced machines. But the moment you go into throughput and you start doing quality and functional quality on those kind of, they are not. I mean, how do you bring that data back into the MES platform was another challenge that I kind of, so it was more of an integration problem for me to kind of, solve. And I mean, there are definitely very good use cases that I kind of, can bring out in terms of our experience. But the most simplest and the most easiest one that I wanted to kind of, bring out was, how do you ensure that the box build of the final product is actually going into the same box on which it was designed? It could be as simple as kind of, saying, scan it here in terms of whatever comes out, and scan the box and make sure that the two numbers are exactly the same, right? And yeah, I mean, on the face of it, looks extremely simple. But it's not something that happens on a every day. You will find many kind of situations where, especially when you're having a constant change in the manufacturing floor, how do you ensure that this product actually fits into the right box, and how do you even prevent those kind of errors from happening? And in terms of the people aspect of the whole factory in itself, I mean, one thing, there's certainly very good people who have come from a good background, who brought that experience from different places, and they have worked with, and they brought that, intelligence over. But what's probably important for me is uh, to kind of emphasize saying that, you know what, you're actually entering it. So tomorrow, if there is a question on the quality or the audit process of it, guys, you actually have something tangible to demonstrate that, you know what, this is a digitized way to kind of, go back and tell the, the people around, saying that, hey, look, it is not exactly the quality problem there. It is because of this kind of an issue. At least there is some data to kind of, substantiate whatever actually happened. So the motivation, we just flipped it around to say why they have to actually kind of, use the MES as against, just continuing with the regular manufacturing process. And very quickly, you will start saying that, okay, you moved into the people process, but how about the financial aspect of whatever we are doing? So one area that I think it's extremely kind of, I mean, I take some pride in kind of ensuring this. There is a term which we use internally called value at risk. And that basically tells us saying that based on the minimum order quantity that you have to have with your suppliers, how much is that quantity supposed to be optimized to, so that you won't be left with a pile of inventory or components that you actually have to use as a raw material. So at the end of the contract, you figure out saying that, you know what, you're eventually left with this much inventory, but the actual production really required 10% of that one. How do you quantify it before you take the order itself, that what is the value at risk? How do you do that? And that is one digitized system that I think we take a lot of great pride in kind of bringing to the industry and also to our organization. And in terms of the lessons that I think, what I probably started off, okay, when we started this whole called, EMS along with a box build and a contract manufacturing, I thought it's going to be a two-way kind of, signal, saying that I would be able to pause the machine right from my desk or whoever is the kind of an operator. So how does it have to be kind of, I mean, I was too ambitious. I was thinking it need not be one way. How do I even stop the process from actually happening in such a way that I stop it on the machine right here through the software and the execution stops? That was really over ambitious. I mean, we had to really go through a lot. I mean, today I would probably say I can control only 30% of the factory in that way, in which the software actually controls what is coming out of the production. But more often than not, I mean, at least 99% of the factory is now sending one way of what is actually happening there. But I still don't have control of, putting that, putting the software ahead of the manufacturing process. And going back to what the AI lessons we were kind of hearing from the previous speaker, one thing that kind of stood out when I mean, not me, it's not my quote, it came from what I've heard. So the moment you have a trillion sensors all across, I mean, just imagine the highways, the transportation industry, and all across. The moment you manufacture 1 trillion sensors, and each sensor is $1, overnight you have become $1 trillion economy. So that actually stood out with me, saying that, you know what, it's a very interesting way to look at it. So the more number of sensors we keep adding, but the important aspect there is that the moment you add the sensor, the BOM cost has actually gone up. So you take a traditional equipment like a printer. Oh, fantastic! How do I kind of find out what's happening on the on the field in there? But the moment I add the sensor, the cost of the printer, are you willing to pay for that extra price to kind of do that? That's a big trade-off between the product team, the engineering team, and the finance team, of course. And so that with that, I say that of course there are many use cases, and I think given the credit of what a previous speaker spoke about how AI needs to be implemented, sure there are lots of opportunities for using AI across because yeah, that's the way to kind of solve the planning problem at least. But beyond that, I think in a nutshell, this is what my experience kind of lends into Vivek and the rest of the guys. So manufacturing and connected factory using simple digitization and having an MES in place to solve most of the problems. Of course, there are other backbone in the industry, like you have your traditional ERP still kind of ensuring that the CFO gets a visibility of how much inventory is kind of brought in, is a consumption in there. So three metrics that I kind of like in the overall process that I go back and tell is quality, inventory, and the speed of manufacturing. So these three are what kind of are the holy grail for us to kind of go back and say how did digital kind of solve against these three metrics. So that in a nutshell, Vivek and all is what my experience is on the connected factory. Thank you, guys.